The city stirred awake long before John did. Before dawn's pale light crept into the alleyways, he had already rolled his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders and huddled closer to the cold concrete pillar of the overpass. The air was sharp with winter's bite, and each exhale hung in front of him like a cloud. His stomach growled a low, persistent reminder of the stale bread crust he'd found in a dumpster the night before. As headlights from early delivery trucks sliced through the darkness above, John heard a faint, trembling whine that cut through the hum of traffic. He sat up, muscles stiff from hours spent unmoving, and peered into the shadowed recess beneath the highway. There, curled in a puddle of frozen slush, was a tiny creature no bigger than his forearm. Its fur was matted and dirty, its ribs visible through a coat that had never known shelter. John's heart clenched. He had grown used to ignoring suffering in this part of town. People shuffled by, heads down, afraid to make eye contact. But something about that trembling whine tugged at him. He crouched low, careful not to startle the pup, and reached into the pocket of his threadbare jacket. His hand came away with a half-smoked cigarette and a scrap of soggy newspaper. Gently, he spread the paper on the concrete floor and set it just beyond the pup's curled-up form, hoping the slight barrier might ease its fear. "Hey, little one," he murmured, his voice rough from cold and disuse. He tore off a corner of the newspaper, revealing a few crumbs of bread. At first, the pup's ears flattened, and its wide, frightened eyes stayed fixed on John. But hunger overcame fear. With a tentative sniff, it padded forward, nose twitching as it discovered the stale morsels. Each crumb disappeared quickly, and before long the pup was licking its muzzle in cautious gratitude. John sat back on his heels, watching as the creature, no more than a few months old, looked up at him with wary curiosity. "You're as cold as I am," he said softly, scanning the overpass pillars for cardboard or anything he could repurpose into bedding. The traffic roared overhead, indifferent to their tiny world below. He rummaged through his knapsack and pulled out the last clean shirt he owned. Wrapping it around the pup's shivering body, he noticed how it pressed itself gratefully against the fabric. Lightning-fast regret stabbed John's heart. He'd risked so much caring for anyone. Food was scarce, and shelter scarcer still. Yet as he watched the pup settle against him, its breathing evening out, he felt an unexpected warmth bloom within. He realized, in that moment, that loneliness was a hunger far worse than any empty stomach. He curled the remaining blanket into a makeshift nest beside him. "I don't know your name yet, but you can stay here tonight," he whispered. The pup's eyes fluttered closed in response, trust blooming as fragile as the first spring bud. John listened to the steady rhythm of its breath, matching his own heartbeat to its small life. Above them, the city's din continued, horns, engines, footsteps, but beneath the overpass, something miraculous had begun, a bond forged in hardship, a promise that neither would face the streets alone again. By mid-morning, the pale winter sun had climbed higher, but offered little warmth beneath the overpass. John gently lifted the scruffy puppy, now christened Hope, onto his lap and wrapped her in the faded blue shirt he had borrowed. As the traffic's roar faded into the background, the pair rose to their feet, shoulders squared against the chill. Together, they stepped onto the cracked sidewalk and into the sprawling urban maze. Their first challenge was food. John had learned long ago which cafes tossed yesterday's pastries into the back alley trash bins, and today he led Hope to a narrow lane behind a small bakery. Steam leaked from damp dumpsters, and the faint aroma of sugar still lingered. With practiced hands, John pried open a lid and found a half-eaten croissant. He tore off a corner, handed it to Hope, and watched her devour it with eager slurps, crumbs flying onto her whiskers. Encouraged by her appetite, John reached for the crust himself, nibbling thoughtfully. It was stale, but for once it tasted sweeter than any gourmet meal he'd ever known. He rubbed Hope's ears, and her tail thumped gratefully against his thigh. In that moment, neither felt as cold or as hungry. Together, they found enough. As they moved on, John kept a wary eye out for trouble. The city streets were no friendlier by day. Men pushed carts of scrap metal, while uniformed officers patrolled main roads, eyes sharp for any sign of disturbance. But John and Hope navigated the fringes, deserted courtyards, hidden stairwells, side streets where trash bins shielded their makeshift camp from view. Whenever Hope sniffed at a discarded soda can or an empty cardboard box, John praised her softly, teaching her which places were safe and which to avoid. That afternoon, a storm rolled in, sleet peppered the pavement, turning puddles into icy traps. John led Hope into the doorway of an abandoned storefront. Broken windows let in gusts of wind, but a thick curtain of plastic sheeting provided a meager shield. There, he huddled with Hope pressed close, sharing the small space as though it were a palace. He pressed his bleeding hands against her damp fur to warm himself. She licked his palm, and he felt her gentle heartbeat against his own, proof that they were alive and together. As darkness fell, John faced the nightly dilemma: where to sleep. The shelter down the block barred animals, and the city's no camping laws drove the homeless deeper into hidden corridors. With Hope in his arms, John chose a service entrance behind a church. The heavy door had no lock, only a doorstop wedge. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a small storage closet. John slipped in first, then Hope, and closed the door silently behind them. He removed his own coat and wrapped it around Hope, tucking her between his chest and the wall. Then, for the first time in years, John lay down on something softer than concrete, a discarded pile of old blankets someone had left behind. Exhaustion tugged at his bones, but Hope's soft breathing kept him awake just long enough to whisper, "We'll make it. I promise." Through the thin door, muffled voices passed, volunteers setting up a soup kitchen for the next morning. John closed his eyes, comforted by the faint scent of hot broth and fresh bread drifting through the vents. Hope nestled into his arms, and together they drifted into an uneasy sleep, two souls learning to trust the world again, one shared meal, one hidden corner, one quiet night at a time. By mid-February, winter had tightened its grip on the city. A sudden blizzard rolled in overnight, blanketing streets and alleyways in a heavy cloak of snow that swirled in gusts of icy wind. John and Hope woke to a world transformed, a bone-chilling gray sky pressed low against rooftops, and every sound muffled by the shifting drifts. Huddled beneath an awning outside an all-night laundromat, John wrapped his threadbare coat tighter around himself and Hope. He had grown adept at finding small sanctuaries, service entrances, recessed doorways, where the wind lost its teeth. But tonight, even those shelters offered little respite. Snow piled against the walls, melting in dirty rivulets at their feet. When Hope shivered, John pressed her close against his chest, letting her small body heat burn through his layers. Their routine quickly unraveled under the storm's onslaught. Trash bins froze shut, denying them their usual scraps. Cafes and bakeries shuttered early, and the nighttime soup kitchens ran low on volunteers battling the elements. John's stomach gnawed with hunger as he scanned the empty streets. Hope nosed a battered grate half hidden beneath snowdrifts, but John diverted her glance. He knew even in summer those grates could be treacherous. Yet in the gray hush of pre-dawn, Hope bolted, chasing after a lone pigeon that straggled along the curb. In a heartbeat, she vanished from view with a sharp, panicked yelp. "Hope!" John shouted, lunging forward, snow spraying around him. He spotted her paw slipping between the metal bars of an uncovered grate, the other three legs scrabbling fruitlessly for purchase. Blood welled around her white fur, staining the new snow. John's heart slammed against his ribs. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he reached in to free her. The cold metal bit through his thin gloves, and he struggled to pry the bars apart. Hope whimpered, each breath trembling with pain and fear. Cars passed on the street above, oblivious to the drama beneath. When his first attempts failed, John spat curses into the wind, ripping at the grate with raw desperation. At last, with a groan of twisted metal, the grate shifted enough for Hope to wriggle free. John scooped her into his arms, cradling her against his battered coat. Her breathing was shallow, and a deep cut on her pad oozed steadily. He wrapped strips of his shirt around her leg to stem the bleeding, but he knew makeshift bandages were not enough. Dawn broke pale and brittle, and John faced an impossible choice: to leave Hope here, exposed to the cold, exposed to danger, or to seek real help and risk losing everything. His mind raced through half-remembered names and places: a low-rent vet clinic downtown, a donation-supported shelter that sometimes took injured strays. None guaranteed kindness to a homeless man and his dog. But as Hope's head lolled against his shoulder, eyes closed in pain, John tightened his grip and made up his mind. He wrapped her in his coat, adjusted the makeshift bandage, and set off into the slush-filled streets. Each step was agony, cold seeping in, traffic roaring past, pedestrians averting their eyes, but he refused to look away. At the clinic's sliding doors, his breath formed ragged clouds. Inside, fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic hit him like a wave. A receptionist glanced up at his mud-spattered boots and Hope's drooping form. John's voice cracked as he pleaded, "Please, I have no money, but she needs help." For a tense beat, silence stretched. Then, as Hope whimpered in his arms, a nurse appeared and led them to a treatment room. In that standstill of uncertainty, John realized that love could be more radical than any law or prejudice. And as a vet technician gently cleaned Hope's wound and slipped a warm blanket around her, he understood, their bond had carried them through fire and storm and would carry them through this trial, too. The clinic's waiting room smelled of antiseptic and tension. John sat on a narrow vinyl bench, Hope cradled in his arms and wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. The sterile lights above flickered as he watched the vet techs move hurriedly through swinging doors, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Embarrassment prickled at him, he, a disheveled man in a threadbare coat, sitting in this place that normally catered to clients with wallets fatter than his. But all that faded the moment Hope gave a small, pained whimper. He reached down and gently stroked her head. "Mr. Alvarez?" A soft voice called. John looked up to see a woman in a bright purple fleece, social worker Maria, whom he'd only met that morning outside the shelter. She offered him a warm, understanding smile. "They've patched her up. They'll keep her overnight for observation, but she's going to be fine." John exhaled so sharply he startled Hope into lifting her head. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing bringing her here. No one should suffer alone." Over the next hour, Maria arranged a makeshift veterinary bill through a local animal rescue fund. Dr. Patel, the volunteer vet who recognized the urgency in John's eyes, worked quickly, cleaning and disinfecting the wound on Hope's paw, suturing the torn pad, and fitting her with a small protective boot. Each time Hope flinched, John murmured reassurance, his fingertips tracing the curve of her healed leg. Once the procedure was complete, Maria led John and Hope to a small consultation room lined with pamphlets for pet-friendly outreach programs. She handed him a card for Safe Haven Paws, a non-profit that provided temporary shelter and supplies for animals of homeless owners. "They have space for you both," Maria explained. "They also run a weekly food bank for people and pets, and they can help you find stable housing that allows animals." John stared at the crisp, color-printed brochure, disbelief and gratitude warring in his eyes. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, voice husky. Maria shook her head. "Pay it forward when you can. For now, focus on Hope's recovery and on giving yourself a chance." Outside, the February sun had dipped low, casting long blue shadows across the parking lot. Maria ushered John and Hope toward her car, an old sedan with a bumper sticker that read "Compassion Conquers All." She helped John lift Hope into the back seat, then drove them through slush-filled streets to the Safe Haven Paws facility, a converted townhouse painted a hopeful sky blue, with a small fenced yard where rescued dogs romped. Inside, volunteers greeted them with gentle enthusiasm. One offered John a steaming cup of coffee and a warm blanket, while another guided Hope to a resting kennel lined with soft bedding. The facility's coordinator, a kind-faced woman named Serena, explained the schedule: morning walks, midday meals, and an evening social where other guests and their pets shared stories and support. That night, as John settled onto a cot in the staff-supervised dormitory beside Hope's kennel, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: relief. The distant hum of fluorescent lights and muffled barks lulled him into a calm he once thought impossible. He reached over and patted the blanket covering Hope. "We did it, girl," he murmured into the dim room. "We made it through the worst." And as Hope's steady breathing filled the space between them, John realized that the kindness of strangers had given them both a lifeline and that, for the first time in a long time, he dared to believe in a better tomorrow. Spring light filtered through the dusty windows of the Safe Haven Paws facility as John awoke to the soft whine of Hope greeting the new day. After weeks spent shivering beneath freeway overpasses and huddling in abandoned doorways, this bright room with its clean floors and gentle hum of conversation felt like another world. He reached over the low partition of Hope's kennel, stroked her head, and smiled at the proud wag of her tail. Over breakfast in the communal kitchen, a steaming bowl of oatmeal for John, and a hearty serving of kibble and chicken broth for Hope, Serena, the program coordinator, arrived with good news. "We've found you a spot in the transitional housing program," she announced, her eyes warm. John's heart pounded. He'd filled out the application 2 days earlier, handwriting shaky with hope and doubt. Now Serena slid him a thick envelope containing the lease agreement. The afternoon was a whirl of packing. With help from Maria, the social worker, John gathered the few belongings he'd managed to keep: a worn duffel bag, a battered photo of better days, and the dented metal tin where he'd stashed spare change. Volunteers provided duvets, kitchen supplies, and a small crate for Hope. As they loaded the last box into the van, Hope bounded beside John, sniffing at the new blankets with curiosity. Their new home was a modest apartment on the second floor of a low-rise building painted sunny yellow. The living area was sparse but cozy: a kitchenette with a two-burner stove, a folding table, and a well-loved armchair by the window. Serena had thoughtfully placed a water bowl and a soft dog bed in a corner near the radiator, where Hope immediately settled with approving sniffs. John ran a hand over the counter and felt a warmth he hadn't known since before the streets. This was theirs. That evening, John cooked his first home-cooked meal in years: scrambled eggs and sautéed vegetables, while Hope watched from her bed with bright, grateful eyes. They ate side by side, sharing stolen bites and laughter at Hope's frantic tail wagging. After dinner, John lay on the armchair with a thin blanket over his legs and read aloud from a battered paperback. Hope chewed contentedly on a bone, occasionally looking up as though urging him to keep reading. As midnight approached, light from the street lamp below cast gentle shadows across the room. John knelt beside Hope's bed, brushing his fingers through her fur. "We've come so far," he whispered. He felt the weight of countless cold nights, the ache of hunger and fear, begin to lift. Hope's soft snore was his answer. Love and loyalty had carried them through every trial, and now, in this little apartment filled with the promise of stability, they had at last found a home beyond the streets, together.